We've been uncovering amazing remains of a Byzantine church complex. The church covers an area of about 1.5 dunums.
Archaeologists have just uncovered what many are calling the most significant biblical find in decades, a 1,500-year-old Byzantine church tucked away near the Sea of Galilee, a church that may have been built over the very hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. Inside, they found a breathtaking mosaic, so well preserved it feels as though it was crafted yesterday. And what it declares is astonishing. Peter, not just an apostle, but the chief of the apostles, the bearer of the keys to the kingdom of heaven. This isn't just another historical artifact. This is theological dynamite, a divine message, carved in stone, that could tilt the balance in one of Christianity's longest and most heated debates. So, what does this really mean? And why is no one talking about it? Stay with me, because this discovery changes everything. Every so often, a discovery surfaces that doesn't just inform us, it confronts us. This is one of those discoveries. For centuries, scholars, theologians, and pilgrims have wrestled with the mystery of a town central to the gospel story, a place called Bethsaida. The New Testament mentions it multiple times, identifying it as the hometown of 3 apostles, Peter, Andrew, and Philip. John 1:44 states it clearly. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. But where was Bethsaida exactly? That question has haunted biblical scholarship for over 100 years. Theories abounded, but the evidence was thin, and debates remained unresolved. Until now. On the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, just steps from the waters that once carried Christ's footsteps, a team of archaeologists, led by Professor Morai Avium and Dr. Stephen Notley, uncovered the ruins of a Byzantine-era church, buried beneath centuries of earth. For over 1,400 years it lay hidden, and inside they discovered something far greater than archaeology. They discovered theology written in stone. In the very center of the church's mosaic floor gleamed an inscription in Koine Greek, an inscription that directly refers to Peter, not just as an apostle, not merely as a follower, but as the chief of the apostles, the one entrusted with the keys to the kingdom of heaven. The language is unmistakable, echoing the very words of Matthew 16:19, where Jesus says to Peter, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." The discovery is extraordinary, not only because of its message, but because of how perfectly preserved it is. After 14 centuries, the mosaic remains pristine. Its letters are sharp, its lines crisp, as though time itself dared not touch it. Almost as if it had been sealed by Providence, waiting for this generation to uncover its meaning. The impact has been immediate. Leading scholars and theologians are calling it one of the most significant biblical finds in decades. Dr. Craig Evans, a renowned expert on the historical Jesus, has suggested this may be the clearest archaeological link ever found to Peter's actual home. And Dr. Notley, co-director of the El Araj excavations, noted, "It's not just about the mosaic, it's about what it confirms. The church, the town, the people, it's all coming together now." But to truly grasp why this matters, we need to understand the story of Bethsaida itself, why it is one of the greatest unresolved mysteries in biblical archaeology. Bethsaida, its name meaning house of the fishermen in Aramaic, was once a thriving fishing village, fitting for the hometown of apostles, whose lives would be forever changed by a Galilean teacher. According to the Gospels, Bethsaida was the stage for miracles. It was here that the blind were given sight, Mark 8:22. Here thousands were fed with loaves and fishes, Luke 9:10-17. And nearby Jesus walked on the very waters of the Sea of Galilee. Yet Bethsaida is also remembered for something darker. It is one of the only towns Jesus openly condemned. "Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago." After this curse, Bethsaida vanishes from the New Testament, and soon after, from history itself. For centuries, pilgrims searched for it, guided only by fragments of legend and devotional tradition. Yet no firm consensus ever formed. The town had been swallowed by time, taking with it a piece of the gospel's physical reality, until now. In the 19th century, German and American scholars suggested that Et Tel, a mound nearly 2 kilometers inland from the Sea of Galilee, might be the long-lost site of Bethsaida. But this theory quickly ran into problems. The distance from the shoreline was striking, hardly fitting for a fishing village. Even more concerning, Et Tel lacked the clear Roman-era remains that would place it in the time of Jesus. For the hometown of fishermen, it simply didn't add up. The real breakthrough came after the Six-Day War in 1967, when the region reopened to exploration. Israeli surveys began pointing toward a far more promising candidate, El Araj, a low-lying site much closer to the Sea of Galilee. Pottery fragments, pieces of glass, and mosaic traces hinted at continuous settlement across centuries. Interest surged dramatically in the early 2000s. When Pope John Paul II was flown over the region, the excavation team greeted him with a symbolic gift, a replica of an ancient bronze key discovered on site, a gesture heavy with meaning, echoing Christ's promise to Peter in Matthew 16. By 2016, a full-scale archaeological dig began at El Araj, led by a team supported by institutions including the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Almost immediately, their work bore fruit. In the very first season, they uncovered clear traces of Roman presence, coins and tools dating back to the 1st century CE. By 2018, the discoveries deepened. The foundations of a Byzantine basilica, alongside a bathhouse, guest rooms, and a public complex, exactly the sort of infrastructure expected at a site frequented by early Christian pilgrims. And then came the inscriptions. Encircled in a delicate geometric mosaic, a Greek inscription offered a prayer for a man named Constantine, not the emperor, but likely a local patron, and in its lines, it names Peter in terms that cannot be misunderstood, chief of the apostles, holder of the keys of the heavenly spheres. The words align perfectly with the account of Willibald, an 8th century Bavarian bishop, who wrote of visiting Bethsaida and spending the night in a church dedicated to Peter and Andrew. For centuries, scholars dismissed Willibald's writings as pious legend. But now, the stones seem to confirm his testimony. The church he described may have been found. The stones are real. The titles are intact. And the language, bold, theological, and unapologetic, proclaims what early Christians believed with absolute conviction. Beneath centuries of Galilean soil, under layers of silence and floods, a sacred structure had waited. It endured while kingdoms rose and fell, while empires came and went, while borders shifted and churches divided. And then, in 2016, spades struck stone. What emerged was more than a place of prayer. It was a complex, a church, a bathhouse, and perhaps even a monastic guest house, the kind of holy infrastructure that would welcome pilgrims seeking to touch the living memory of the apostles. And at its heart, the written word returned. 3 Greek inscriptions were uncovered in the mosaic floor. 2 were fragmentary, but 1, preserved in almost perfect condition, carried the full weight of 1,000 years of faith in just a few lines. Set within an elegant circular frame of tessellated stone, it reads, "The whole work of paving the diaconicon with mosaic was done by the zeal of Constantine, servant of Christ, for the chief of the apostles and holder of the keys of the heavenly spheres. Saint Peter, intercede for him and his children." This is not poetry. This is proclamation. This isn't metaphor. This is precise theological language. The inscription does not simply call Peter a disciple. It identifies him as chief of the apostles, a title that implies not equality, but authority. And it names him holder of the keys, a phrase echoing Jesus' words in Matthew 16:19, and rooted in Isaiah 22:22, where keys symbolize dynastic succession and exclusive stewardship. Such exalted language is no accident. It reflects what early Byzantine Christians believed, not only about Peter, but about this very place. Even more astonishing is how seamlessly this discovery aligns with the testimony of Willibald, the Bavarian bishop who, in 725 AD, recorded staying overnight in a church at Bethsaida dedicated to Peter and Andrew. He described a site by the water, with facilities for guests steeped in sacred commemoration. For centuries, Willibald's words were treated with suspicion. dismissed as pious exaggeration or a romanticized pilgrim's tale. But now, with the church unearthed, the layout revealed, and the dedication inscription intact, his account reads less like legend and more like eyewitness evidence. The church beneath the soil preserved more than stones. It preserved memory. It preserved belief. And in doing so, it gives us something incredibly rare in biblical archaeology: a bridge between text and artifact, between tradition and history. But that bridge leads to an even greater question: not just what this place is, but why it matters. Because uncovering an ancient church is one thing, but finding one constructed directly over a first-century fishing village, matching the Gospels in both location and story, is something else entirely. This may well be the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. This is not coincidence. This is historical continuity, rising from beneath the soil, preserved not only in Scripture, but in stone, in architecture, and in the devotion of the early church. The church at El Araj, likely built in the 5th or 6th century, was not placed at random. Early Christians did not scatter their churches haphazardly across the land. They built with intention. They built on memory. They built over places where they believed God had moved. We see this across the Holy Land. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, built over the cave believed to mark Christ's birth. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, raised over the traditional site of his crucifixion and resurrection. The Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth, commemorating the angel's message to Mary. And now, perhaps, Bethsaida, long debated and forgotten, reemerges with the same markers of sacred memory. The builders of this church had no access to modern archaeology, carbon dating, or GPS. What they had was living memory, oral tradition, and a spiritual geography still fresh with trust. They built where memory remained alive, and the remains at El Araj confirm it. Coins, ceramics, tools, and foundations, all pointing to a thriving first-century fishing village, a village of real people, real lives, and perhaps real apostles. And rising above it all, a church, not just dedicated to a saint, but to Peter himself, the very man to whom Jesus said, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." That alone is extraordinary. But the inscription goes further. It doesn't merely honor Peter as an apostle. It proclaims him as chief of the apostles. The word used, koryphos, is unambiguous. It conveys leadership, headship, preeminence. Peter is identified not as one among many, but as the one set above the rest, not by chance, but by divine appointment. And consider this. The inscription is in Greek, not Latin. It was not carved in Rome. It was not a later papal invention. It was laid into the mosaic floor of a Byzantine church in Galilee, centuries before the Great Schism, in a region still close to the apostles in both time and place. This matters, because it shows Peter's primacy, his unique authority, was not a Roman construct. It was already present in the theology and worship of the early undivided church, East and West alike. Most striking of all is the second title, Holder of the Keys of the Heavenly Kingdom. This is not poetic flourish. It is a direct reference to Matthew 16:19, the very verse that has anchored Catholic theology for centuries. The moment Jesus grants Peter an authority that is spiritual, binding, and enduring. This verse has been debated in councils, argued in the Reformation, and defended in catechisms. And now it has been found inscribed in stone in Peter's homeland by believers who lived centuries before those theological battles ever began. It does not prove everything, but it proves something vital, that Peter's unique role was recognized, honored, and proclaimed across traditions long before division. It shows us that in the very land where Peter once fished and followed Christ, his primacy was remembered not as myth, but as reality. The early church remembered Peter not as just another apostle, but as the one chosen to lead the keys, the kingdom, and the debate. For nearly 2,000 years, Peter's role has stood at the center of Christian identity and division. Critics of the Catholic position often point to Matthew 18:18, where Jesus extends the authority to bind and loose to all the apostles, suggesting that Peter was not uniquely privileged, but a representative of the collective. And it's true, the other apostles were given authority, but what they were not given were the keys. That detail matters more than it first appears. In the ancient world, keys were not trinkets. They symbolized stewardship and exclusive access, not just to buildings, but to delegated royal power. To hold the king's keys was to wield his authority in his absence. This imagery is rooted in Isaiah 22:22, where God declares of Eliakim, "I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open." For centuries, this passage has been seen as a foreshadowing of Christ's authority, and of the one to whom he would entrust it.